church, and it was on commanding to love your enemies. So he stands up and he says, I bet many of us feel we have many enemies in our lives. He says, now raise your hands if you have many enemies. So quite a few people, they raised their hands. And now raise your hands if you have only a few enemies. So a few people raised their hands because most people had a lot of enemies, he was thinking. And then he says, now raise your hands if you only have one or two. And so he looked around the church, and there was a few people who like two or three that just had one or two enemies. He thought, well, that's great. It's good that you only have one or two enemies. He says, most of us feel like we have lots of enemies. Now raise your hands, he says, if you have no enemies. So he looks around the church, he's looking all around, and way back in the back is a really old guy. And he sees his hand up, and the guy stands up, he says, I have no enemies! And so the priest says, come on up! And so he gets up there and he says, how old are you? And the guy says, I am 98 years old and I have no enemies. And the priest says, well, what a wonderful Christian life you must have led. He says, tell us how it is that you have no enemies. He says, and he laughs, he says, well, I'm old and they're all dead. Enemies. We're going to look a little bit at enemies today. I don't know if I've ever preached on enemies, but we're going to have a bit of a go. And Larry asked me a little while ago to preach on this. And as I was looking at it, it is the context for this scripture that he gave me is part of one of my favorite passages of scripture. So I said to Larry, we're going to have to do a little bit of a two-parter here so we can help them to understand the context and to see what God did. So if you'd like to turn with me to 2 Kings 6, that's where we're going to be reading, starting at verse 8. So that's the 2 King verse 6, or chapter 6, starting at 8. And we're going to read down through to 17. Now the king of Aram was at war with Israel. After conferring with his officers, he said, I will set up my camp at such and such a place. The man of God sent word to the king of Israel, beware of the passing that place, because the Arameans are going down there. So the king of Israel checked on that place indicated by the man of God. Time and time again, Elisha warned the king so that he was on his guard in such places. This enraged the king of Aram. He summoned his officers and demanded of them, will you not tell me which one of us is on the side of the king of Israel? None of us, my lord, the king, said one of his officers, but Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel, your very words you speak in your bedroom. Go find out where he is, the king ordered, so I can send men and capture him. The report came back, he is at Dothan. Then he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there, and he went there by night, surrounded the city. And the servant of the man of God woke up and went out early the next morning. An army with horses and chariots had surrounded that city. Oh, my lord, what shall we do? The servant asked. Don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed, O Lord, open his eyes so he may see. Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked, and he saw hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. I love that. It's so awesome. We forget sometimes that there's a big battle going on and that God's army is there. And I also love it too when you see God pulling the strings of things. I'm sure that the king was a little frustrated that he couldn't figure out what was going on. And it doesn't say quite how big the army was. It just says it was a sizable force. But whatever it was, when they woke up, there was a big army. And I wonder also, if you can look at people's characters, so this king would have been frustrated and probably fairly desperate because he was at war with Israel and he couldn't seem to get a leg up because Elisha knew what was going on. So he sends his army to go capture him. I mean, if Elisha knew what was going on, don't you think he would probably know? That's how I was thinking of it. But I picture it like this, though. It's a nice night. Everybody's in their city, and they go to bed not thinking too much. somebody wakes up in the morning, they hear a bit of a rustle outside, you get up and you like rub your eyes and you look out your window and you do like that double take, and there's a big army surrounding you and everybody's in panic. I mean, that'd be pretty crazy. I've heard of times when armies would siege cities. They would go surround them and they would just basically hang out and attack them until they ran out of food and they gave up. So in those days, it would be a terrible thing to wake up and have an army around you. And so the servant of Elisha wakes up and he is in a full-gone panic. He wakes up. I picture it like he's like shaking his master. Wake up, we're in big trouble. Elisha's just like, I picture him as this calm guy. He just kind of gets up. He's like, what's the big deal? He puts on his robe. He's like, come with me. I figured in the city there would be a high spot, takes him up to the high spot, tells him, I'm not worried. You shouldn't be worried. Those that are for us are greater than those that are against us. And then he prays. And what an amazing thing. He prays that the servant's eyes would be opened and to see on the hills all around him the army that's there. I think we at times forget how amazing and how powerful God is and how much He is in control. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. We don't need to act like we are defeated because we have a great big army on our side. But we also know the end of the story. God has won. He's already defeated death. So Elisha, he didn't need to see those big armies. He didn't seem to be panicked. He just gets up. His faith was solid. He knew what was going on. And I think if the story had stopped there, I mean, we could learn a lot from that. We could learn to pray and trust and have our eyes opened would be my thing I would leave you with. Open your eyes so we can see what's going around us because God is for us. But we're going to read a little bit more of what happens next. So we're going to continue on 2 Kings 6, starting at verse 18. As the enemy came down towards him, Elisha prayed, strike these people with blindness. So he struck them with blindness, as Elisha had asked. Elisha told them, it is not the road, and this is not the city. Like, I mean, how can these guys miss this? This is not the road, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will lead you to the man you are looking for. And he led them to Samaria. After they entered the city, Elisha said, Lord, open the eyes of these men so they can see. Then the Lord opened their eyes, and they looked, and they were inside Samaria. Then the king of Israel saw them, and he asked Elisha, shall I kill them, my father? Shall I kill them? Do not kill them, he answered. Would you kill men who have captured with your own sword or bow? Set food and water before them so that they may eat and drink and then go back to their master. So he prepared a great feast for them. And after they had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away and they returned to their master. So the bands from the Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory. Again, we see God doing some really cool, fun stuff. I wonder if that was Elisha's idea or God's idea to make them go blind. I mean, could you imagine you get up, you go to get ready to attack a city, and you're all ready to attack it, and then all of a sudden you're blind, and there's some guy saying, hey, you're in the wrong place. Come follow me. I mean, I think that's funny, but anyway. But I couldn't imagine this army is just, and then they say, come follow me. So they're blind and they're led far away, and then Elijah prays again, and their eyes are opened, and they're inside of another walled city with an army around them. I mean, that's probably a time when there's going to be a lot of panic. But the amazing thing is that God did peacefully what the Israel army probably couldn't have done very well. He did it through one person, did it without bloodshed, and he changed so much. There's a little book I read to my kids, and the tagline is, "Every story tells his name." I love how the Bible leads us up to Jesus and how one man changed the world. And we see one man making a big difference here. And then the king of Israel, Joram, asks, what should he do? Should he kill them? And Elisha says, no, we shouldn't kill our captors. He says, cook them a meal and send them on their way. God's purpose was not to destroy the Arameans. His purpose was to save the Israelites. That's what he was doing. That's what he was concerned of. So the king set a great big feast, showing his confidence in God's ability. He listened and did what he should have done. And in that time, eating together under one roof constituted making like a covenant of peace. So the king is making a big offering, saying, let's have peace. Let's do the right thing here. God was for his people's defense. And sometimes I know we try to do things on in our own way, by force, when God has so much of a better way. And then what was the result? I mean, the Israelite could have fought the armies of Aram for a long time. But in one moment, God changed everything, and the armies were at peace, and they stopped raiding Israel's territory. Jesus said in Matthew 5, he says, "For I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." I was trying to think in my life about enemies. I mean, I'm a pretty nice guy, right? Everybody kind of likes me. I'd see if I get a reaction or not. I haven't had a lot of enemies. I've been mean to people. But I was trying to think about what I would consider an enemy to make a good example. And I've had an opportunity to work at a number of churches, and Claire and I were looking at going to a church. And so we went out for the big interviewing weekend. And this is very stressful, just so you know, for a pastor to go visit a church, because I want to give you my best, and then the church always wants to give you their best, and everybody's really, really nice, and then usually afterwards you find out all the stuff that was going on, but that doesn't matter. So that interviewing weekend, I was expecting to give my best, and I was expecting to see their best. Well, partway in, this lady was so mean to me. I couldn't believe it. I was actually quite taken back that some lady would be that mean to a pastor who was coming to visit, who the hiring committee was recommending to the church. Well, I thought, everybody has a bad day. It'll be okay. So we prayed about it, and we did feel God was calling us to this church, and we went. And that lady was not having a bad day. Man. She was not having a bad day. And I did take some comfort that she wasn't just mean to me. She was just mean to everybody. And business meetings were not very nice. And it was hard. And so it was so hard. I considered it, and I had tried to be nice to her. I had tried to chat with her and try to have conversation. But man, wasn't getting anywhere. And so myself, like many other people in that church, we just tried to avoid her. And partway through my ministry there, I was really challenged by God. I was reading in the Bible, I was working on my character, and she just kept coming up. And it was like I was getting hit in the face that I really needed to love this lady. Oh, man, that was scary. I don't know if you've ever met really mean people, but sometimes it's really hard to be nice to them. So I started by praying for her every day. Every day I prayed for her. A lot. And as I was doing that, you know what happened? She became a lot less scary and more of a real person. So I prayed for her a lot. And then I decided we'll try to take her in small doses. So I would visit with her, and I would go try to find things in common with her, and we'd have conversations, and I got to find out what her life was like. And you know what I found out was she was a lady who had made some bad decisions, and those bad decisions had made her life very difficult, and she often made other people's lives difficult because of that. But And I wouldn't say we became best of friends, but she wasn't so much an enemy. And for a long time, she actually became quite a strong supporter of mine, which surprised a lot of people. But it wasn't until I decided to do the right thing and live a godly life and try to be a godly presence in her life that things made a big difference. And it was scary. Whoa. I remember the first time, I was like, I gotta go talk to her now. I've been praying for her for a long time. And I was trying to figure out the right time, and it was dark, and she was in the parking lot getting into a car, and it was kind of like the Holy Spirit was like moving me, and I was trying not to. And I went and had a conversation with her, and it wasn't that bad. But God changed my eyes to see that lady for not just a problem, but a real person. I think sometimes we see people as enemies and we leave them as enemies. We forget that God has created everyone. He loves everyone. People don't always walk with Him, but they're all His. We need to pray for new eyes and see the battle that's going on around us and the power that's available. We need to pray for new hearts to love those around us. And then we got to cook a big feast for them and love on them the best that we can. No matter how they treat us. So I've got a video I want to play for you. It's a little bit interesting, but I'll get these guys to head it up.
Christian, I think that we should all be able to agree on at least 2 things. One, you've had some pretty important things to say about loving your enemies. And 2, nobody follows his advice. Because everybody's got a really great excuse about why they're exempt from loving their enemies. Well, she started it.
Jesus said I should love my enemies. That doesn't mean I have to like them.
It's different when they can kill you. Oh, man, we really put a lot of thought and energy into justifying our behavior, don't we? I guess it's just been occurring to me recently that love your enemies is pretty much the one thing that Jesus said that we just ignore it altogether. Listen here, son. If someone walks up to you and starts pushing you around, you don't take nothing from nobody. You push him right back and you let him know who's the boss. Yeah, wait. But Dad, I thought you always told me to love my enemies. Tough loving your enemies. That's what it is. It's tough loving your enemies. Or we kind of just fit it into whatever little box makes us feel the most comfortable. As if there exists a comfortable way to love your enemies. Man, no wonder they killed that Jesus guy. We probably would have killed him too. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Okay, I know that sounds really nice in theory, but come on, Jesus, this is the 21st century. You're going to have to be more specific than just a blanket statement like, love your enemies, if you expect anybody to take you seriously. I meant what I said. Then you are insane. I mean, we've had 2,000 years to ruminate on his teachings, and look at us, doing the exact things he's warned us against. As if we didn't even listen. Or maybe we did, and we just didn't like what we heard. Because it's hard to love your enemies. It's really hard. And it's not fun either. You see, when it comes down to it, you have 2 kinds of enemies. The first are the people that you know personally that you just straight up hate. But don't worry, they've always done something to you first.
I cannot believe Rhonda. She had to know I was going to invite Brad to the dance, but she decided to swoop in and ask him first. I hate her. She is my sworn enemy now.
Yeah, that's real Christian. I mean, if we can't even get along with people when it comes to stupid stuff, maybe that's why the world is the way the world is. Oh, and speaking of that, the other kind of enemies that we need to talk about are enemies. Like, I'm talking about all of the other countries that supposedly want to kill us. I mean, that kind of complicates the love them thing, you know? Look, I know this is a really touchy subject. All I'm saying is that it seems like you have to start ignoring a lot of what Jesus preached when you subscribe to the gospel of safety and security. Because I don't care who they are or what they're trying to do to us. I just don't think that Jesus wanted us to live with hate or in fear. I feel like those were two of his main points. And I feel like a lot of the time we neglect to show love to people that really need it most. I know it's a really uncomfortable thought, but what if the only complicated thing about loving your enemies is that it's not complicated?
So it's a little bit of a in-your-face video, isn't it? I didn't really like watching that myself, but he makes some good points in kind of a funny, sarcastic way. I think we do miss what Jesus has commanded us to do, to love those around us if we love someone, don't love others. And I was really taken back by this, that I was able to make a difference in that one lady's life when nobody else was giving her a chance in that church. Because in all reality, Jesus spent a lot of time on the cross for us. And that wasn't very convenient for him. I mean, he could have said, I think I'll get down now. I've had enough. And left us to be on our own. I mean, Matthew 26 says, do you not think I can call my Father and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say that this must happen? Jesus went through a lot for us. And if we stand for him, we can make a difference. There's a neat book that Francis Chan wrote called Crazy Love. I've read it, and I'm going to read it again, because as I was looking through stuff, I was quite taken back some of it. I want to read you a story of people who are living in a good way. This guy's name is Brother Yun. Yun was born in 1958 in the southern part of the Hainan province in China. When he was 16 years old, with his father dying from stomach cancer, he and his family were nearly starving. Yun met Jesus Christ. Over the years, Yun grew and began to preach the gospel all over the country. The police were constantly tracking him and arresting him more than 30 times. Usually he was able to escape or elude long-term prison, but not always. Yun was in prison for 3 lengthy terms, including 1 4-year term, which he fasted from water and food for a period of 74 days. Although it's considered medically impossible for someone to survive that long without water, God sustained him. During those 4 years, he underwent intense torture, including repeating beatings with a whip and multiple shocks from an electric baton. Later on, Yun was held in a maximum security prison to ensure that he would never escape their prison. The guards beat Yun's legs until he was crippled and couldn't walk. Despite this, Brother Yun walked out of the prison 6 weeks later. The gates and the barriers that were always closed and barred were miraculously opened. No guard tried to stop him. It was if those they were invisible to him. It wasn't until he was outside and safe that Brother Yun realized he was walking on his broken legs. Brother Yun and his family came to Germany in September 2001 after escaping China. But Yun is still wanted by the police. They now encourage believers around the world by sharing what God has done and is doing in China and many other places. They are deeply involved with the Back to Jerusalem movement, aiming to preach the gospel and establish fellowships of believers in all the countries, cities, and towns and ethnic groups between China and Jerusalem. The vision is no small task, for within those nations lay 3 of the largest spiritual strongholds in the world today that have yet to be conquered by the gospel: the giants of Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. There are amazing stories in this book, and there's so many that we don't have time for today, of people who were in difficult places, who decided they needed to love and to serve no matter what. And the world was changed around them, for them, and people's lives were changed. And I doubt we'll have things as difficult as he did. I don't know if you know, but this past week, Russia put out a new rule And I'm going to read what Christianity Today has. This week, Russian President Vladimir Putin approved a package of anti-terrorism laws that usher in tighter restrictions on missionary activity and evangelism. Despite present protests from religious leaders and human rights advocates, the Kremlin announced Putin's approval yesterday. The amendments include laws against sharing faith in homes, online or anywhere but recognized church buildings, and it goes into effect July 20th. Protestants and religious minorities small enough to gather in homes fear they will be most effective. Last month, the local police officer came to a home where a group of Pentecostals meet each Sunday. And Constantin Bandes, a deputy bishop of the Pentecostal Union, told Forum 18 with contempt expression, now they are adopting the law. I'll have to drive you all out of here. I reckon we should now fear such zealous enforcement. I know it's not easy in Canada to be a Christian, but I definitely think it's easier than some places of the world. And what I know from talking to people is that people are looking for God. They're searching for that part that's missing in their life. They want to meet with this spiritual thing that they're missing in their life. And we have an opportunity to share that with them. The problem is that we often want to do it from the comfort of our couches. And loving your enemies is not comfortable. It's not easy. But it's what we're supposed to do. The message in Colossians 3 says, dress in the wardrobe God picked out for you. Compassion, kindness, humility, discipline, quiet strength, and an even-tempered. Content with second place, quick to forgive an offense. Forgive as quickly and completely as the Master forgave you. And regardless of what else you put on, wear love. It's your basic all-purpose garment. Never be without it. So what we need to try to do, and I want to encourage you to do, and hopefully the Lord's touched your heart, is that we need to try to do our best each day to pray and ask God to open our eyes that we may see the battle that's around us, that we may be encouraged to see that we may have strength to go and love those around us. And no matter how much somebody slaps us in the face or is mean to us, we should cook a feast for them because we have no idea what God will do with that. We should try our very best to do our part. And I believe God will be faithful and do His part. We may not always see it. But God is so much bigger than we are. Let's take a moment to pray. Father, I ask that you will open our eyes to see more like you do. That we may see your armies all around us, supporting us, fighting for us. Father, help us to see people as you do, to have hearts that break for those who need to hear from you. Help us to just start by loving those around us. Because people need you. We need you. We need you in a much greater way. Help us to be willing to cook a feast for them. And to do our best. We thank you, Father. We pray this in your name. Amen.